try to do a PowerPoint slideshow that I had prepared for a while, a long time back, but it speaks to some of the things that we were talking about yesterday. And when I was thinking about it this morning about after 1:30, I realized that I had missed the whole opportunity to ask or to offer up a time and period for questions. Did anything come up? Anything arise? Anything? Did I strike a nerve? Did I offend you? Did I keep you awake too long? I don't know. In our discussion yesterday.
Some of us said at the social last night that you said you could go on for a couple more hours. Some of us said, go for it.
That's beautiful to be able to hear that. You know, it's much the same as with sermons. Because I don't know, as a parish priest, did you or do you have one of those people who sit at the back and they do this all the time?
That's all of us when we're visiting at each other's churches.
Or some people come up to the communion rail with the watch kind of backwards on their hand when they're receiving, just to kind of remind you.
Yeah. Oh, they're ever so subtle, aren't they?
One Sunday I had them take them off and put them in their pocket. And actually, not because they were doing that, but just wanted to see. And at the end of it, a lot of them forgot to put them back on. I said, see, you didn't need that anyway.
There you go.
You raised something yesterday about the bearing of the umbilical cord after birth, and it somehow resonates with where I come from, Zimbabwe. As soon as a child is born and the umbilical cord is tied up, and whatever else remains, it's buried into the ground,
Yes.
signifying the relationship between that person and the sacredness of the ground in which the umbilical cord has been buried. Is it the same in your culture as well?
Yes. And as my grandmother explained to me after, so what they do is there's a whole ceremony, an offering of thanksgiving to the Creator with tobacco for the child and for me, I suppose. And then when the umbilical falls off, cord falls off, it is then taken and it's wrapped in leather with a prayer ribbon and an offering, and then it's taken out usually by the grandmother or else the aunts, and it's taken and is buried in the land. And as my grandmother explained, it is this way. It is. I would always know where home is. I would always know my connection to the land I came from, and I would go back to. And so that's one of the things that, you know, even for myself, I'm very, very well aware of, is that where I will be buried. And I know very well, you know, how I will be taken back home. So there's major assurances in that.
Yes.
And you can go through life, and I can go through life, I can travel, I can go anywhere, and I can go to all the places that I'm supposed to go to, but I know where home is. I can live in all kinds of cities anywhere, but I know where home is. So, but yeah, you know, in my last visit when I went to Kenya, what is it? When I went to Kenya, and I was talking with the people there. There was a gentleman that we were visiting, that we were invited to visit, and so he's asking about all the, you know, that, is it true that you have, you know, those usual questions that, you know, about Canada, you know, and everything else in the area. Is it true in Canada that your people, that you dress in skins of the animals? Yes. Is it true that you use the feathers of the birds to adorn yourself? And I said, yes. Is it true that you use drums for dancing and for celebration and gathering the people together? I said, yes. I said, in the end, you know what this proves? That we're all brothers and sisters. That we are related. And so I usually begin every conversation with, I greet you today, my brothers and sisters, my relatives, from all lands, from everywhere. And as I expanded out, at one interfaith gathering in Toronto, and I said to everyone, I said, I welcome all of you to this beautiful land called Canada. Canada that is wide and expansive. Not expensive unless you live in Toronto. Thanks, John. But it's expansive. And there's room enough for all of us here. And I welcome you to this land. As a member of the original peoples, First Peoples here, we welcome you to this land. And at the very end, after all the other ceremony, that I did a smudge, I did a prayer offering and everything else. And then at the very end, I was greeted by a gentleman who came up and said, I just want to say to you, he said, I have been in this country, Canada, now for 5 years. He says, as an immigrant coming to Canada for 5 years, he said, today, for the first time, it feels like home. He says, because you welcomed me, you shaking my hand all the way through this whole conversation. And then he said, but the other joy that I have is I get to phone back to the old country and talk to my relatives there and tell them that I spoke to a true Indian. You're so close. But I wanted to just touch on a few things. And one of them is about the truth and reality of the Indigenous people on reserves. And I've had some wonderful conversations with a few of you. And I do ask you, if you have questions, please ask them. There's no way you can offend me. People have tried. You can't offend me. This is one of those safe places you can ask all those questions you've ever wanted to ask but didn't know who to approach. So this is your time to learn. This is your time to participate. Your time to be included into the circle. I wanted to talk this morning a little bit about beginnings. And everything has a beginning. And when we greet people, we usually, what we do is we would come up to a person and say, hello, how are you doing? Or else at a lineup at the gas station, the grocery store, and where you'd say, how are you doing? But in truth, you don't really want an answer, do you? Because otherwise, when people ask me, I am so tempted to say, well, I'll be honest with you, my lower back, my lumbar has been bothering me for this last while. I think it was a little bit because my wife asked me to mow the lawn for too many times this week. And of course, we had the guys that come in that fertilize the lawn, and the grass is growing way too fast. And of course, the rain and all the bugs and everything else. And then we had to take out everything. But my lower back has really been bothering me. And my right foot, the ankle, I don't know what I did, but and you're going like, oh, please, I just want my soup and I want to go home and eat it, that kind of thing. So there is that reality, but in the Indigenous community, because it is a small community and everybody knows what everybody's doing and what has happened, there is a reality. So when you say a greeting, and the greeting in Plains Cree, so I'm going to teach you a few words in Plains Cree today. So when you want to say, hello, how are you? Let's just go with hello first. It's a T and a D together, and it sounds like this. Danse.
Danse.
Danse. Danse. Danse.
Danse.
And that means hello. Greetings. And if you say danse kia, danse kia, how are you? But it's a deeper how are you. it's a question that it says basically, how are you doing? How's your spirit? How's your health? How's everything about you inside? How's your whole being? And my great aunt, but since we don't have aunts or uncles in Indigenous circles, she was known as my grandmother. So when I was in the ambulance, working ambulance, and the family would call for her, I would come and I would say, "Danse kia." How are you doing? Danse kia noko. In other words, how are you doing, my grandmother? And she would always respond just because she saw me, regardless if, it wasn't like that yesterday, a broken arm or anything, and she would say, "Neo sin." In other words, that means I feel like brand new, I feel like a baby inside. I feel renewed. And I always took that with a great big smile and the utmost love, because that meant she felt better just because I was there looking after her. Danse kia noko. Neo sin. Neo sin. And that was my great aunt, Mary Rose. It's important to really realize about the people and the histories of this land that the indigenous peoples were here for time, as we say, time immemorial. And whether you want to go through the arguments about how human beings appeared wherever we came from the Great Migration coming through the Bering Strait, or whether it was, Uncle Jim with that old Fairlane car coming down the road. However you want to think about it, we were here. And when you talk about the discoverers or the explorers washing up on the shore and everything else, and you start to realize that we weren't discovered. Number one, we didn't know we were lost. The only ones who were lost was the ones who washed up on shore and said, "Indians." Indians. I do have to tell you one funny story. Is that when I was working ambulance, there was my partner and I, who were both from the reserve, were called in for hospital transfer. And we were to take a patient back up to Edmonton at the time, if I remember right. And so Jerry and I came in with the stretcher and everything else to pick up the patient. And he was an older gentleman, and it gives you the time and the age of how people responded at that time. And he looked at us, he looked at the nurse, he looked at us, looked at the nurse, looked at us. "Indians! Indians!" Like that. I said, "Yes, sir. We're here to take you to the hospital in Edmonton, and I'm going to be looking after you all the way." He goes, "They allow you to do that now?" And I said, "Oh, you'd be shocked at what they let us do." I said, "Yes, I'm going to be looking after you all the way," and then I started talking about the IVs and everything else like that. But it gives you an illustration about how time has changed, and at the same time, time hasn't changed. And how we, at the same time, use our words and our understanding of the time and the context that we have to try to bring a better understanding of the greater social world that we live in, with all peoples, all human beings, all our relatives. I wanted to start out with a few slides. I'm not going to stay with it because I have trouble following my own slides. But everyone's heard about the doctrine of discovery, right? Yeah. You heard about Terra Nullius, right? No, Archbishop, please tell us. Okay, we'll start out with the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery was basically from the papal bulls that were given to the explorers who went out to foreign lands and boats and everything else like that, and said basically, very simplistically, that if you find another culture or another peoples that are less than us socially or whatever, you can claim it for whatever country you come from, whether it be Portugal, England, Brunswick.
You don't know how funny that is.
I sometimes just kill myself. But the doctrine of discovery, simplistic, is the doctrine of discovery that was designed to set beliefs and legal framework that was developed by the edicts of Pope Nicholas V. Done Versitas Bull in 1452 and Inter Cetra Bull in 1493. And anyway, the doctrine of discovery basically was to give the rights of claim to all the countries that wanted to claim it as theirs. And that was an opportunity for them to basically say that this is now ours. And I always use, I have a great imagination, just ask my wife. After 45 years, we can sit in a car when we travel together. We have the greatest time laughing because we tell stories and we can see the images in our minds. And just we start laughing and laughing. And I talked to her this last time. We were on a road trip to Prince Albert going for a consecration for the new bishop-elect. And I said, if anybody ever just was able to sit and listen in on us, they think we're crazy or that we're off our medication. I said, because I can start a story and she can see it in her mind and she is just laughing and laughing. And we're stop for a minute, I gotta breathe kind of thing. Anyway, but in my mind, I can see this image of the explorer coming out and landing out, and the elegant, ever so elegant, how people approach him. Look at this! Oh my goodness! All this amazing open land. Look at the vines and the trees and the grass and everything else. All you people, sit down, get out of the way. Oh my goodness, the mountains, the blue rivers. Oh my goodness, orchards would look really good. We'll call it British Columbia. Yeah, okay, good. Oh my goodness, and look at this, the Great Plains. People, sit down, get out of the way, you're interfering. Oh my goodness, look at that. Wow. Tell you what, get the Indians to sit down. Please get them out of the way. Oh my goodness, this is all ours. There's nobody here. And everyone's going like, is he talking to us or about beyond us? What's going on? And so this is my imagination of how I see all of this happening, right? It's much the same as those famous CBC vignettes. Do you remember those? Where you see the explorer come up and ask the people, what do they call this area? He goes, what do you call this area? Dude, I could have said that. Anyway, what do you call this area? Canada. In other words, the village, right? Oh, they call it Canada. Oh! And then you go into the dance. And okay,
Don't forget the other guy who said, "Sir, I think it's their word for the village. That's what they're saying." And then, oh, I know the language. It's Canada. It means the flame.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always an expert in there, right?
Well, the center.
Yep. And the other one that they used is the other term, of course, terra nullius. Empty land. So, like I said, I love to tell stories. I love to tell narratives as I go along. And especially through this whole process of trying to understand where we're at. And so I started a little story that goes along with the slides. A small cloud could be seen on the horizon. And a breeze began to stir the still leaves on the trees. Terra nullius, land unoccupied. Ripples began to cross the once grassy face of the waters, the glassy face of the waters. The doctrines and the frameworks of belief set up to enable the exploration and conquering of lands occupied by peoples from time before time. pressure and the change of air touched the face of the sleepers, and their eyes began to open. Indigenous peoples are, well, indigenous to the land. We are the Nehiwak. We are the people of the land. We're still here. We're still your neighbor. Let us hear each other's stories with respect, and let us honor each other in peace and in love. To the story, the elders and the leaders of were the first to call out to the peoples, and together they rose up as one people. What is Bill C-262 under? As I said, we love our acronyms, right? Under United Nations Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I do need to make mention that Canada is one of the last to sign under the United Nations Declarations of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. One of the last ones to sign it. Where the rest, the United Nations all signed and said, yes, right, the Indigenous peoples do have rights. Canada was one of the resistant ones and said, let us think about that first. How is that going to affect us financially? As part of recompense of the history or the legacy that we live in? Let me think about that first. Finally, under the pressure of the United Nations, Canada signed. Have we progressed enough as a society to fully repudiate the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius? It has finally happened. Where the Pope said, you know what, it was wrong. And it challenged the whole concept and opportunities of what we see and how we respond. So the next question, can we see the need of justice and equality for all peoples of Canada? Can we walk with our neighbors and understand them in the context of their history? Do we as a society stand up when wrong is before us, and do we understand our shared history and legacy? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the end of September is the TRC Day, Truth and Reconciliation Day, on September 30th. Many places have no idea or concept of what that means. I did a presentation in Toronto, and a very well-meaning individual came up and said, oh, you're going to be talking about reconciliation? I said, yes, I am. They said, oh, that's wonderful. We did that. It was such a fun program. We did that 2 Sundays. It was the best 2 hours we ever had. We're already done. And I said, you're already done. Reconciliation. Oh yeah, it was a great presentation. And I said, well, you need to talk to the rest of Canada. We're still in the truth-telling phase. Do you know about or have you acknowledged the story told from the TRC? The pain, the things that have happened in residential schools? Or are you one of the great minimalists or denialists? Minimalists? Well, it wasn't that bad. What about the good things? I'm sure there was a lot of good things that came out of the residential schools. Or denialists? No, that did not happen because it wasn't written in the history books. I didn't hear about it. Nobody told me. That's all made up. Nothing like that could ever happen in this country. I then have to ask, do you know about the 94 calls to action? That was the recommendation for the summation of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation, hearing of the stories of the people, the traumas that they went through, and the experiences that they had. I've always asked one of my dear brothers, who is a priest, and now retired, and was in the Diocese of Toronto. And he did his presentation, he did his experience and story about what happened to him in residential school. And his experience was simply this, that he was treated less than a human being. Oh, but we all were. And that in his experience, he was taken away from his parents and put in residential school. Oh yes, but in England, we always have done that. And in residential school, he was beaten and punished and locked in a closet. And he had pins put through his tongue when he spoke his tongue, his own language. And his own traumas were some that were, for example, even food, which was substandard and which did not taste good and was not good. He told a story at Church of the Redeemer in Toronto. And he told the story about when he was forced to eat this food that had gone bad. And he couldn't hold it. And he threw up. And the priests and the nuns forced him to eat his own vomit, because nothing can be wasted. Or to those that were so traumatized that they, were unable to hold themselves, and then they were paraded around with soiled clothes for everyone to ridicule. And it goes on and on and on. And the hard and the painful part of this is that it was church people who were doing this in the name of Christ. Because we in the church knew better, and that these people were less. And so for my people, my own relatives, I hear them when they turn to me and they say, why are you part of something that has worked so hard to destroy us? To kill us off? To diminish us? How do we respond? How we respond today is significant. I pray for the minimalists and the denialists, because out of their own sensitivity, they deny another's reality. And in this, we need to change. The 94 calls to action, which call every college, every university, every curriculum, every province, every class to teach about Indigenous history, the Indigenous peoples out here. For the new immigration policies, that all people coming into Canada will be taught about what the Indigenous reality is in history, of who the Indigenous people are on this land, and why we have all, the best way I say it is, we are the most studied, least understood. And there's a reason that right now, anyone who's ever seen the penal system knows that the incarceration rate and at the same time the representation within the penal system is overrepresented by Indigenous peoples. A lot of my own cousins are in prisons, whether you're in Prince Albert or Saskatoon or even Edmonton and beyond. And when I see them, they're always in an angry, frustrated, traumatized state, ready to fight. They're, as we know, war doesn't bring peace, and the penal system does not rehabilitate. it is up to us to start changing our communities, our society, our Canada, today and tomorrow. The 94 calls to action speak to each and every one of us. How do we respond? The church needing to respond. There was a call for the Pope to respond and to apologize for the wrongs done. He kind of did, especially if you're a person from faith, you kind of did. But a lot of Indigenous people said, no, he didn't. So, we've already had the apology. Michael Pierce, our primate, who said those momentous words, I am sorry, more than words can say. I am sorry that we participated in the system of oppression and assimilation. I am sorry beyond words, and more than I can say about how we tried to reshape you, the Indigenous people, into our image. I am sorry, and it went on. And the next day, the Indigenous elders responded with, we accept it. We accept your apology. In General Synod 2019, our primate, Fred Hills, made this apology for spiritual harm. We, the Anglican Church of Canada, apologize to the Indigenous peoples that we minimized, we tore, and tried to steal away from you your languages and your practices, your spirituality. And where we tried to force upon you, and it went on. And within the next and the Indigenous representation of the Indigenous person, they're both standing on a mound. And they're both reaching out as equals and shaking hands. Making the deal that as long as the water flows and the grass grows, that these treaties will be adhered to, acknowledged, and respected. But the truth and the reality is, because I know the treaties, and I, at the same time, especially for Treaty 6, and even for myself, having to sit in Ottawa with the Chief and Council, and talking with them about how we need to start working on fulfilling the treaties. And at that time, we were talking about the Treaty Land Entitlement Act. And where there was a reality that was unspoken, because it was about to be, it was already acknowledged, that even as they were writing it up, the treaties, there was a group right behind and talking about how they weren't going to respect it or how they could amend it and change it as it was signed. The treaties as they sit right now are, I used this illustration in one of our conversations here. We're akin to a huge straw mattress. A huge straw mattress, canvas straw mattress, on this beautiful big bed made of wonderful logs of wood, log framed bed. And they had this beautiful straw mattress. It was very comfortable. That was the first part of the treaty. And as we went along time, there was a person somewhere in the government, somewhere in the governmental system, and he saw a straw sticking out of the mattress. And he pulled it out. Nobody noticed. And he kept pulling out straws, and nobody noticed. Up until the time that whoever the Indigenous peoples were laying on that huge, beautiful straw mattress of the treaties as they were drawn up, they started to feel those logs and rolls underneath, and going like, what is going on here? To the point where you couldn't even lay on it anymore. And it was then that the Indigenous people turned to the federal government and said, what are you doing? You have written up these treaties with us as the indigenous peoples, and you are not true to your own word. But yet you demand everything from us. How dare you? And then that's when the legalities start to come in. The treaties today are still in battle. We fight for land, we fight for recognition, we fight for rights. We fight for the recognition and UNDRIP to be recognized as individuals and peoples in our own land. In Treaty 6 for the Plains Cree First Nations, Onion Lake, Siksikutsmakio, R119, 120. In 1964 was when they allowed us to start voting in Canada, because before that we weren't Canadians. We weren't recognized in our own country.
So who were you?
We were nobodies. We were nobody. We weren't human beings. We were wards of the government. We were the Indian problem.
Is it true in order to be recognized as a citizen or to vote, you have to relinquish your status?
Yep.
I have to say this. I can't imagine coming from Bermuda and somebody's telling me I have to relinquish my Bermudianism, my Bermudian status. I'm a Bermudian. I was born there. My parents were born there. I'm a Bermudian. I happen to be a Canadian as well, but I'm a Bermudian.
My grandfather, who believed in fighting for this land in Canada, had to give up his treaty number to go to the army to serve. And he served in the army, following in behind the tanks, and when he came back, he had to really fight to get his treaty back. And at that time, we had a really good chief, and who got him his treaty number back. And his treaty number was something that was able to carry on, which I now fall under that. So for myself, I am to the federal government, I am 344-007-8301. That's who I am. And I get really controversial responses when I say this next. The only difference is it's held on a card and not tattooed on me. Because we were interred in what we call reserves, and we weren't allowed to leave without being put into prison if we did. We had no rights. We had no power. We could not sell anything. We could not go into stores. And we had less than everything else in the regular society. Our curriculums and education continues, in most cases, to this day, less than. My children had to take 2 years of upgrading to get into college, to the college level that everybody else did. Health is less than. It's all generics, or else if not that, it is, I always used to laugh about it. They would say, you can take this pill, this pill, this pill, this pill, this pill, this pill, and these 4 others for your case. And so somebody's making money out of all these pills, right? Or you can use this one brand name. That'll cure it all. I know because I used to work in the medical system. I used to sit on health boards. I used to work with the chief and council. I used to go to meetings with them, even to Ottawa for the treaty land entitlement, where we had to fight for our land. The land that we had, we fought for it, so there was a certain amount of land. 1954 is when they did the census of how many people were on there, but they recognized that the government still owes that much amount land to our First Nations treaty group, our reserve. And so they said, okay, we'll give you your land, but this is the land that we're going to offer to you. And so our chief and council went and took a look at it, and it was basically desert. They were going like, well, what are we going to do with that? And they said, well, that's what we're offering you. And they said, okay, we want the money then, give us the money. So in the news, it went out that Onion Lake First Nations received $40 million from the federal government for the treaty land entitlement to the Onion Lake First Nations group. And everybody, I remember because I felt the backlash, and everyone said, that's my tax money going to these Indians again. That's my tax money going to the Indians again. And so they were mad at the Indian people because they're getting all this money all the time. All this money all the time. The reserve, we wanted to expand the reserve as it sits. And so we approached and we wanted to get the land that was next to us. Now some of them were under 99-year leases through the government, who were the Indian agents at that time, leased that land for 99 years to those farmer families. And so when we approached and we said we want the land that is next to the reserve, the land prices jumped 300% overnight. In the end, it was those local farmers that ended up in multi-million-dollar homes, 65-foot motor homes and everything else like that. And they were the ones who got away. And the Indians of our reserve got the land back. But in the news, it was still, the money went to those Indians, our tax dollars. The federal government right now uses our interest that they give back to us in portions and fractions. But the principle of all the oil, gas, everything from our reserve, and they hold it in the federal government. They hold it, and they give us an allowance back. And then a lot of the things that we ask for, it's our own money that's coming back to us. Many of the chiefs and council have already had this conversation that if we ask for all the money that we are owed by the federal government, our own money from our own resources, oil, gas, minerals, logging, on and on, that Canada would be broke tomorrow. The Indigenous people are funding the federal government. These are hard realities that are there, that are unspoken of. And it's up to us to understand the story of what Canada is, who Canada is, and who the Indigenous peoples are. And what that means is us taking time, us taking an opportunity to step down from our high horse and get down to the level of the land of the people. Then they heal up. The people of the land, the Indigenous peoples, and to get to their level and to hear their stories. And to acknowledge their reality of our brokenness, and at the same time, those of us that fight for our rights. It's easy to stereotype, isn't it? I ask a lot of people what they think when they see it, when I mention an Indian. They think of the person that's passed out on outside the bar, that's wet themselves, panhandling. Hey buddy, you got some loose change? Or else causing a problem in the store. Or else, if not that, they have that idealistic one where I should be in buckskins and leather and beads, riding on my horse over the plains, hunting a buffalo with my bow and arrow.
Don't forget the loincloth.
Oh, the loincloth.
That good stuff.
Thanks.
That is good stuff. Lord have mercy. But it is, it's important about how we hear each other's stories and how we respect each other. And at the same time, the most important thing is to use this precious gift that the Lord Almighty has given to us, and that's our mind. To move beyond our own prejudices, our own ideals, and simplicity to something that is more complex, and that is another human being who is beside us. My brothers and sisters, each and every one of you have an amazing story. People always ask me that, don't you get tired talking and listening to people? I said, no. I'm a storyteller by nature. My grandfather made me that way, into a storyteller. And I love hearing your stories. There's not enough time in a day to listen to your stories and to listen to you and to marvel at what God is doing through the most amazing vessels, and that is you. What you do in your ministry is paramount. What you teach your people is paramount. And if you teach them about equality, to look beyond and to see what God sees, you go, it is good. Just as the Lord did. Just imagine. Like I said, I tell stories. So when I was in Thunder Bay, they called on me lots to do funeral services for those that were not affiliated to many churches. And I did a funeral service, and I was finished off and greeting everybody at the door and everything else. They all went down for the stairs for the reception, and I was just changed out of my vestments, put on my suit jacket, was going downstairs, checked, making sure the collar's on right and everything else. And I came down the stairs and came around, and there was this painting. Bam! And basically what the artist, and I'm no artist by any stretch, my wife is, she does multi-mediums that she uses. But the artist had a palette, and using their thumb, took oil, I don't know if there's sound effects. It helps with the illustration of the story. And the artist basically did that. And I came around, bam! Whoa. And in my mind, I was saying to myself, hopefully they didn't pay too much for that. I could have done that. And it would probably look the same. And so I'm going, whoa, what an assault to the eyes. And then the funeral director came in right behind me. And he said, oh, Father Chris, he said, do you like our painting? I said, whoa, yeah, it's colorful, isn't it? And he goes, he looked at me kind of smiled, and he says, you don't see it, do you? I said, how can you not see it? Whoa! He said, no, you don't see it. I said, what do you mean? He said, take a step back. So when I came down the stairs, the painting was here. I came down like this. Whoa, it was that close. He said, no, step across, down by the other door. I had to go to about over here. I looked at the painting, and it was one of the most beautiful paintings I've ever seen. And what it was the artist, with these splotches of oil, had a painting, and it was basically this, of these two gloriously beautiful, multicolored hands holding up a globe, the earth. And the earth was made up of all these beautiful continents, and the water, and the waves, and everything was there. And there's all these multitude of colors of peoples, spots all the way around this world. And in my mind, as I said, I could see a whole story and a whole sermon. And I came to the realization that's how God sees things. So much so that God could say, son, come look at this. Look at this. Isn't this beautiful? Isn't it good? I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go to them and tell them that we want them to see this too. And how special and how beautiful this is, and all that they do, and how it plays an important role. Each and every one of them play an important role to make the beautiful world. Son, will you do that? Dad, of course you know I will. Father, whatever you ask, I will do. Our world is a beautiful place. Human beings are beautiful creatures, so incredibly complex. And we need to see the beauty, but we don't. And that's because we are this close to the painting. But to truly see the beauty in it, we need to step back a little bit and try to envision it through God's eyes, and to see the beauty, so much so that we would have grace and mercy for each other, love and forgiveness, and to walk and to seek peace, and the willingness to take time to want to listen to each other's stories. As Canadians, we have one thing last to acknowledge. None of us were taught Canadian history in school. We knew everything about the USSR, Russia, Soviet Union, however it's called now, the United States, the Americas, a little bit about African history, but nothing about Canada. So in my last book foray, I would note, and I did a search, and I found a nice big tome on Sir John A. Macdonald. I wanted to read the other side, on his autobiography, on how he saw things, the Indian problem, and at the same time to try to hear what the government was trying to do. So I leave a little bit of homework with you because I recognize time here, and I want to give at least the last 5 minutes for questions. Do you ever hear about the 1969 White Paper? No, Archbishop Chris, please tell us about it. The 1969 White Paper was drawn up by the federal government to try to eliminate the Indian problem. A few later, it was leaked out. A few years later, 15 years, they would eliminate the Indian problem, which means getting beyond the treaties. Everyone would be assimilated, and there would be no more indigenous or treaty Indians. The 1969 White Paper. Because it was leaked out, it was an embarrassment to the government and to the government party that was in power at that time.
I think his name, the Prime Minister's name is Trudeau, wasn't it?
People ask me about politics sometimes, and they always say, which is the better, government party to vote for. I said, it doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter who you vote for. In the end, the government always gets in. Good answer? It's yours now. Because every party has failed, whether it be conservative, NDP, whether it be on and on liberal. Everyone has failed to identify exactly, or if not that, to honor the treaties or the indigenous peoples, or to follow what they promised. So I leave that with you, the 1969 white paper, and its respondent paper that fell out later on, it was called the Red Paper. I think it came out in 1972 or 1974, it escapes me right now. So I leave you with a little bit of homework for you to do in research. In the last few minutes here, I hit you with a lot of stuff. I like the end. No, it isn't. For you are the story, and together we are Canada. And may we never forget the peoples of God's creation. A sermon point, use that story about the world. And how important it is we walk together. For we are one in this creation. We are only given this one world. We can't live on the moon yet. We can't live on Mars, much less Alpha Centauri, 4.5 light years away. Giddy Prime. With your brother.
Quick statement first. When I first went to university in 1995, my residence, Don, was an Indigenous student, and he was telling me that he couldn't go back home because he was being sponsored for a master's, and because he started that in 1994, there's still a policy that you couldn't practice a master's level education type job back on the reservation if the government paid for it. So he was being forced to have to live in the city because he wanted to be a lawyer, but he initially wanted to be a lawyer back on the reservation. And because he was being sponsored by the government, he wasn't allowed to take that education back home. And I couldn't comprehend, being told, okay, because you made yourself really highly educated and, indispensable, you can't go home.
Yeah.
But that was, and he was getting the program knowing that was part of the policy statement, so he couldn't go home with that education and actually practice at home. And that's 1995. Great. My question to you is, so I briefed you yesterday, obviously, a bit like you, I'm intertwined in this story, both sides are really break my heart, and I really get emotional over a lot of this stuff. I was on a ship when the mass graves were found. And military members will speak bluntly to you when they want to. And the member said to me, so you are, me being the chaplain, you are the Nazis in this story. And I was like, whoa, whoa. He's like, genocide, yes. Massacre, yes. Assimilation, yes. And he goes, we never forgave the Nazis, nor would put up with the Nazis. So explain to me why we should put up with the church. And so my question to you is, I'd like to know, as a man of faith who wears the collar of the church, and yet is an Indigenous person to these lands, how you find it to forgive the Nazis of our continent.
It's because of the gospel message. It's because of the gospel message of what Christ has called us to be and do. Religion was created by human beings. The institution was created by human beings. Our Lord and Savior created a personal relationship with human beings. So much so that he was willing to die for people, for human beings. It's the faith, it's the ministry that I believe in. And I believe also because of my life circumstance, my experience going through this journey of life and faith, of all the times that I was beaten up, spat on, called names, threatened, had my hair pulled, my shirt ripped, assaulted more times than I can count, just because I was an Indian. I didn't turn my back on society. I think it would have been easy for me to go into the penal system, not as a chaplain, but as an inmate. But I seriously believe that my wife saved me because she opened the door, as well as my mother, who has very high ideals for me, and says you need to go to church. The church opened the Bible for me. The Bible in all its ugliness of human beings in the beginning, one with us. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. And who is willing to die for me? That is the most powerful statement and gift that I could never turn away. And when I accepted Christ as my Savior, I determined then that I was always going to be a bridge builder between two worlds of conflict. One of myself and the world, my faith and the church, and how all of that can be changed and reconciled by the act of forgiveness. One of the most powerful things I ever experienced was in Ottawa for the treaty land entitlement. And I'll never forget those words from a chief from BC, from British Columbia, who said to all, turned around when all this discussion was happening, and right in the midst of it, totally out of the blue, got up and said to all of you, my brothers, my sisters, across this land, I want you to know that the white man's truth changes from day to day. It depends upon the wind and which way it blows, on whether it's going to stand true or not. But one truth is this: the white man will always try to buy his way out of everything. And no matter how much money he throws at you, healing never comes from back here. Healing never comes from back there. It comes from here. When I can turn and I can say, I forgive. I just about cried when I heard that from him in his own voice. And he spoke so powerfully and so eloquently to remind everybody that no matter what has happened, that we as human beings need to start walking the good road, a new way. And we're healing, reconciliation, forgiveness. That incredibly tough F word. Forgiveness is that which we need to exemplify and live in today. It's easy never to forgive. It's easy to stay angry.
I just heard this the other day. I thought I'd share it. The first to apologize is the bravest. The first to forgive is the strongest. And the first to forget is the happiest. I know the last part is hard, but
No, I know.
yeah.
I remember when my lady.
Part of my heritage is Belgian Jewish, and the 614th commandment in Judaism is to not forget the Shoah. But we don't carry it in the same way. It's acknowledging that we don't give airtime to the evil that took so many, and the evil that has caused so much grief after it. A people for a land without people. Holocaust survivors having to choose between heating and eating a medication in Israel. And a nation divided against each other. I heard that first when I was 22, and I didn't believe it was possible. But over the years, I have learned through working with the Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation in Northern Ireland that it is possible to get to a place where you remember, but you continue to choose to forgive, because not to is to give that rent room.
Yeah.
in your head, in your heart, and in your spirit.
Yeah.
And I have witnessed that being enabled in Northern Ireland, and I believe it's possible. But it takes here and here,
Yeah.
if
I
that
think
makes
it's-
sense.
I think that's one of the things that we start to realize is that God, at the same time. So when we ask for forgiveness, so when you're ordained, especially those words that, that which you forgive is forgiven, that which is retained
Is retained.
To me, that was always phenomenal until I came to the realization it's not me who forgives. Remember that?
Yeah.
And you went, Lord, I get it now. It's not me who forgives. It's the Holy Spirit who forgives. And God forgives completely. Human beings always retain something. In that way, I think that God has very much female attributes, because my wife never forgives. She never forgets. It's amazing. She never forgets anything. So I marvel at her all the time. And anyway, I digress. So hopefully, my dear brother, that helped a little bit.
Because my pushback was that's great for people of faith, but we're dealing with a secular country, and they are looking at the church in his language, like the Nazis of World War II.
Yes.
And you have indigenous brothers and sisters who don't have the same faith as you, who are still looking at the church that way.
Yes.
So how do we get past, I fully agree with you, that Jesus obviously gave me a prime example, but if I don't have that faith, then I don't have that prime example. And so most of our secular country, it does not have the blessing that you have to understand that there is a God that lived and died for you.
Yeah.
So that's my slight pushback, that it works if you have faith, it doesn't work if you don't.
Exactly.
That sounds good.
And that's why we need to be better Christians today. Just in case you think that, there's no one to evangelize, it was about 5, 6 years ago now, that I did a wedding, and I had a 30-year-old come into the church for a bride, for the groomsmen, some of the groomsmen, and his response was this: "So this is a church, eh? What are you doing here?" And I thought, oh my goodness, a whole generation that we have not evangelized to, that we have not talked to. Because we've gotten so comfortable to the great wave before us. We need to get back to the gospel message. We need to start living the gospel truth. And we need to lift up the church and start proclaiming Christ risen. And Christ will come again. Not worried about the building. That's not the church. The people are the church. And if we start looking after the people, start caring for the people, start visiting the people, start looking after them. Do you remember that long, far-off episode, what was it called? Oh, COVID. And when we all had to become televangelists? Some of us better than others, right? But I remember one of the responses that I got back, because as the Bishop of Saskatoon, I was the first to put out the first video transmission from the cathedral. And I recorded the service and everything else that we uploaded, and it went to YouTube and everything else. The responses that I got back was, one of the seniors that wrote back and said, Bishop Chris, we want to thank you for putting the service online so that we could sit and participate. My dear husband, who has always been a faithful Anglican, but has not, because of his infirmities, has not been able to come to church for the last 4 to 5 years, watched your service 5 times in a row because he was so happy to be back in church. And I turned back to the clergy and I said, we have dropped the ball, people. We have omitted and forgotten and disregarded and discarded the most important foundation of the church, and that is those who love the church. Because we are trying to placate and we are trying to satisfy those who don't want to come to church. Something has to change. And so I started to go out and try to help and try to go back to the people and say, I'm your bishop. I'm sorry. Will you please let me in? Humility, humbling ourselves. It's easy to stay angry. I close with this. It's easy to find an angry Indigenous person today who is more than willing to punish you, the church. Who is more than willing to spit on you and threaten you and throw things at you, sue you, assault you. Because all of that has happened to me. But it's incredibly rare to find someone who says, come, let us sing, let us dance together, for we are one in creation, and together we can heal. And that's what Christ called us to do. The institution, religion, we created that. God did not. So I close with this in a prayer. Today, may we walk together. Today, may our hearts open. Today, may our peace reside within us, as the peace was given to all the world through Christ. And Almighty, may you forgive us for what we have done wrong and how we have hurt others, how we have damaged and killed, maimed, destroyed, all again in Christ's name. We have taken the cross, a symbol of oppression, and in many places in time have turned it back to that. Help it be a symbol of life, hope, peace, and reconciliation again. Remind us again that we are called to be the ambassadors of Christ. And may we go forward this day with a new blessing. Blessing of God Almighty, the blessing of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon us in our ministries this day and all days to come. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So folks, just a reminder that the books in the lobby are free for the taking. They're from Art Grade's collection. We shall now have a break. We'll reconvene quarter after. So we'll take a half-hour coffee break and start promptly at quarter after.